So welcome back. This is Night Flight, and today Howdie Mickoski is back, and we are going to talk a little bit about his new book. And honestly, Howdie, I haven't finished it. It is one of those books, I read a little bit and then I start researching. Have you ever had that with other books? Yeah. And if I continue at this pace, it will take me a while, but nevertheless, I found it very interesting as far as I came. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are familiar with your work, but in case we have some new listeners, when you talk about emptying the cave, what is the cave? Can you elaborate on that?
Simplified, the cave is everything in manifested and unmanifested reality. Anything you can name, anything that has a label or a name is the cave.
Okay. So it is not,
You could call it in modern terms, you could call it the matrix, but it's everything.
okay, good. Because when I mentioned the cave, then I met people who actually thought I was talking about a cave. Um, in your book, you say that you talk about the trap question, and you say there is a trap and there is not a trap at the same time. So, how does that work?
So what have we been? It's been about 2 years since we talked, a year and a half. How long do you think it's
Year
been?
and a half, I guess, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. Um, when I wrote the last book, the one before this one, when I wrote Exit the Cave, I had to write a very specific part of information around this subject because to try to present all of these angles at once, which is literally there's two sides of understanding that exiting the cave or exiting the matrix requires. And to put both out at the same time would have been utterly confusing for the average person. So I put out one half of it, which was more of a description of the cave, more of a description of what this reality is, what the matrix is. And that's kind of what we talked about. Since the new book has come out last, wow, October, I guess, or something. It's only been 6 or 7 months. Now I'm having to talk a bit about the depth of the problem. The problem being that there are two opposite truths, which both are correct. One is that there is a type of trap for the soul or um, the depth of the thing that is here within the matrix. And the other side of it, from the realization of what you are, which is no thing or emptiness, that can't possibly be trapped. So on the other side of it, there can't be a trap because there's nothing to be trapped in it. So it's a very challenging presentation because both of those must be, if you just get one of those sides, you will be lopsided. And this journey requires eventuality of being balanced on both sides of those very strange, seemingly oppositions. And I ran into trouble for a long time because I had both of those realizations fairly close to one another 20 years ago. And the problem I got into is the idea that, well, they're opposites, so only one of them must be true. That's how the mind thinks. Mind thinks that only black can be black, it can't be white. And the challenge was it took me a long time to realize that two complete seeming opposites can both be true at the same time. And only when I got comfortable with that could I then finally write Empty the Cave.
And in practical terms, so how can we envision that? Is it, sorry, is it depending on a our belief structure? Or why do you say there is a trap and there is no trap?
It requires the complete self-definition of oneself.
Mm.
One must complete the work of finding out exactly who and what they are. One side of it, the matrix side, that's the figuring out who and what or what the matrix is, external. Self-definition is finding out exactly what you are within. It requires first the work of figuring out the thing you see in the mirror every day. You must start with that because that is what we've come to believe we are. And so that must be fully dissected and fully understood. And actually, a lot of my book, Falling for Truth, was about the work of that part of self-definition. But true self-definition is eventually the realization that even as a form or a thought or an idea or an experience, none of those are actually true. They're they're uh, they're video game elements in a gigantic video game, basically, and that the work must continue much, much deeper to simplify what in Asian traditions would be called emptiness. But that realization of emptiness can be found in at the core of any religious tradition. It doesn't matter whether you look into pure Christianity or pure Buddhism or pure what the Mayans had to say or the Dogon or anything else. Emptiness is the realization of that which is empty within is a key part of the overall work. So that's the core of self-definition, which is eventually completely not just defining that self, but becoming that self. And from that vantage point, that self um, cannot be trapped in anything because it's no thing, not nothing, it's no thing. And so the language is very challenging to put forth. So that's why the book was difficult to write. It was very challenging. It took me a lot longer to write it than I thought it was going to take. And it's been, even though I think it's been written clearly, it seems to be getting, um, some people have been very confused on reading it.
When you talked about emptiness, I was reminded of my former meditation teacher. And he explained that what is looking through your eyes, that what perceives, is ultimately space. It contains all possibilities, and how it plays out is a different story, but it is space and it is very clear. He compared it to clear light. Would you go along
Yeah,
with?
that's a standard terminology. That would be Dzogchen. Dzogchen Buddhism would
Mm,
normally label the void as the clear light. And
mm,
so their meditations are meant to place someone in the clear light with the idea that upon one's death, the natural tendency has to be in this, have been to be in this clear light. So that's what their natural tendency would be. You could also call it pure awareness, awareness that has no, it's hard to describe it. No judge, no, there's no judging to it, and there's the recognition that all that it perceives is a projection. That the awareness itself is um, vibrant and alive, and all that it sees is a projection partially from itself and partially from something else, which we label the matrix. And that becomes this gigantic, convoluted, difficult game that everyone has to unravel themselves from, which has been this massive presentation of endless outer projections to be focused on one way or another, things you like, things you don't like, things you want to change, things you want to fix, things you want to, and it's been this gigantic explosion outward of things and objects that includes thoughts, feelings, expressions, everything, as opposed to someone getting to the core and saying who or what is the awareness or the observer of all that is being witnessed. And the trick is that when they do self-definition in various meditative practices, they get to an observer. They actually get to a point where they can observe their thought or they can observe their feelings. And that's like stage one. That's a big step. But there's comes a realization, oh, there's an observer of that observer. And there can be an even observer of that observer. It goes unbelievably deep. So the process of self-definition, of actually exiting the matrix, is a process that goes backward, deeper into what you are, not forward into knowledge and knowing and whatnot. Because only that which is true can exit the matrix. This is something I say a lot. Only that which is true will exit the matrix. Everything that is false is part of the matrix, therefore it can never leave. That means every tiny drop of false must be let go of, and only truth remain. That's the biblical metaphor of having to pass through the eye of the needle. Through the eye of only what is actually 100% truth can make it through that eye of the needle. As long as there's something false attached to it, it's going to block it, and there won't be able to be the we call it the return to home, right, in exit. And it's a long process, but it's not, and it's hard, but it's not overly complex.
When you say return home, what would you how would you define that going home?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. It's
Because why I
yeah.
ask, I have
Hmm.
um I'm not saying it's completely nonsense. I have a little bit of a problem with it because in my ears it sounds a little bit like the inner child crying out, I want to go home. I had
Mhm.
enough.
Right. No, I can see that. It's the best way I can sort of present it as a thought package, I guess, is when Richard Rose described sort of similar ideas before he died in the 1990s, 80s. He described the emotion of nostalgia as being an extremely important focal point, that there's three main emotions that one has, that is being fear, seduction, and nostalgia. Fear meaning there's something that you're afraid of and you're trying to contain it. Seduction, there's something that externally that you want and you're trying to figure out how to get it. And nostalgia is just this, it's like this sort of fleeting memory. And people turn it into, usually nostalgia comes for something from when you were a child, something in your hometown, something in your school, something from your family, and it's usually always this, it's a wonderful memory. It's something that if someone tries to chase it and try to get it back, they never can. It's like a memory that's there, but it's very pure. There's the nostalgia kind of doesn't, it's not really a truthful memory. It's a how you, if you could just package all the good stuff of something previously, that's what it is. And that's the best way I could describe the feeling of that which is outside the matrix. It's a memory like that. The same way we might have a nostalgic feeling of favorite Christmas we used to have with our family. That type of feeling is the same as I would classify what I'm calling home, or what I'm classifying as that which is outside of the matrix. You can't you can't really put it into anything tangible, but it's a very pure feeling of something that you'd really like to be able to experience again, like in a nostalgic memory.
Um, would you say that the world is somewhat fluid? I mean,
Um,
we perceive it usually as very solid.
hmm,
And yeah, it has definitely a good side to it. So I can touch this
no,
glass.
no,
What?
no, there's no good side to it.
Maybe you let me
Because
finish my
reality
sentence.
is false.
Yeah, okay, but
That's yeah, no. This is really, really important to understand
mhm,
of this picture. As long as someone likes the Matrix in one form or another, as
mm,
long as someone still thinks there's something about this place that is positive, that is good, that can be fixed, that can be transformed, that can be made better, that I can like, that I can enjoy, you're in it. You're going to be in this place and you're going to be tied to it because you can't. That's again the biblical statement of Jesus where you have to hate your father and your mother. It's not meaning you actually, in a sense, hate, it's not your father and your mother. So he's talking about all of this, the entire reality, right? The Christ figure is trying to say there's a place that is true and you're focused on the false. And that's where the entire dilemma comes from because you can't also just as a form, like me and you, we can't totally ignore this either. When we get hungry, we need to eat. If something is throwing rocks at our window, we have to go find out who's throwing rocks at our window. So it's this, we have to interact with it. It's the challenge of it's the challenge of stepping into it and thinking it's meant to be something other than what it is, which is, a suffering pit of hell. So once we have seen what this reality is, I think we can step more into a Cathar or Gnostic frame of mind, which is we're functioning here to finish our work or finish our practice so that we can end this cycle. Like a Buddhist would say, you're finishing your work so you end your time in samsara. So it's very challenging because again, that's not what people want to hear. People are suffering. That's clear. Like all over the world, people are suffering, and their number one, logically, that's what it was for me 35 years ago, is how can I reduce or if possible end the suffering? And what's so strange is this subject, Exit the Cave, has now well, the reincarnation crap has exploded kind of all over the internet. I'm not saying it's because of me personally, right? But it's just because I'm not the first one to talk about it, certainly. Um, but what's so it's like exploded and it's very distorted now. The from where it was like 15, 20 years ago when it was presented, it's all being packaged in such a way as to how you can end your suffering. And ending your suffering is not exiting the cave. Ending, or let's call it reducing your suffering, is a way to restore energy, is a way to repackage the energy that you have so that your energy can be redirected into the areas that you actually want to put it into, where your deepest intent is. But um, it's been packed. The whole idea of ending the reincarnation trap is somehow ending your suffering. And again, that I think is catching another wave of people in another circular trapping pit. It's like every time there's something that's like a door starting to open, it's like another two doors come and shut it down. It's very, very strange how this operates here with these ideas.
yeah, actually, I meant something else, but it doesn't matter. Oh,
No.
here we when we function here in 3D, um, when we look at what we would call matter,
Yeah.
the deeper you look, you split atoms and then you go into smaller and smaller, yeah,
You
particles.
were talking about like solidity and non-solidity. And yes,
Yes.
of course, it's not solid because it's not real.
Yeah.
As soon as you classify it as solid, then you're classifying it as a real thing. But once you have an experience that the solidity is no longer solid, that it becomes transparent, then it obviously indicates then that it's not what you think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But on one level, the fact that I can put my glass here on the table and it appears to be solid has a positive side effect. Otherwise, I couldn't put my glass anywhere. I couldn't probably even hold my glass. You know what I mean?
It's just creating an experience. It's just the same way a video game creates an experience for the character. The character in the video game looks like it's walking on a street. It's not really walking on a street. It's not doing anything. It's just code that has been placed in the game that tells the character when it does this, this is what happens, and things are created to make that happen. I've had these experiences where literally reality manifests instantaneously around whatever, and it can just shift to something else instantaneously. And that's, like everything that I say to the people watching, it's not stuff I've read in a book. This is all stuff I've experienced through my own very intense, almost 10-year period of obsessive practice. And no, yes, from the standpoint of reality, it's definitely not solid. But we learn how to make it solid because it's easier to function that way.
Mhm.
I've told a story before where I got to the point during my practice where I held on to chairs because I wasn't sure when I sat down the chair was still going to be there. And that is, in a sense, that's not really functional for the character in the thing when the video game is constantly changing and the code can't keep up with it, which is kind of what was happening. So it allows the game to proceed smoother. The problem is, the more solid the world is, the less we forget that it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's pluses and minuses to the solidity. And each come with a use, and each come with a its own kind of trap in involved in it. It's the material world, this thing is so strange. And it's why people can spend lifetime after lifetime studying it and still not really fully understand it because it's so, like I said, the pathway is not complex, reality is complex. The thing that we experience on a day-to-day basis is complex to the max. And it could live, you could put a million lifetimes into it and still not actually figure this place out. And that's another important point for people to know, when is it time to stop? There's a time to study, there's a time to practice, there's a time to examine, and then there's a time to realize I know what I need to know in this area, so it's time to stop. And that's one of the hardest things. It's like it's hard for somebody to finally say, I shouldn't continue in this area. Maybe change areas, but it's easy to just keep following the same subject area until one dies. And unfortunately, that will open some doors, but not all the doors one needs to see through.
Yeah, that can be a possibility, but also it can be, what I call the spiritual tourist. Oh yeah, emptiness. We had an experience of that. Wonderful. Off to the next thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh, there is there's a lot of people on the internet and running various organizations and whatnot who have, I think, an honest experience of emptiness. I think it's actually that it's happened to more people than we might think,
Mm.
but it hasn't been integrated. And it took me 15 years of very difficult, almost continuous illness for that 15 years in the integration process, because part of what emptiness does is it reveals what you are not. That's the hard part. It's like it's not so much revealing what you are, it's revealing what you're not. And we want to hold on to really hard to what we think we are. And that is or what you'll find a lot in the what you're talking about is you find in the guru game. The guru has the experience, they do a bunch of work, they have the experience of emptiness, and then they repackage a new egoic structure for themselves and then repackage everything through the new egoic structure, usually with a message of, emptiness, nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, just drink your tea, haha. And, they have this kind of happy message and they even forget their own whole time of work and all the things that they did to have the experience. So it's so strange to see it from the outside. The other one I think someone like you and your listeners would notice is how many spiritual teachers in the last 5 years have been revealed as frauds. Absolutely as complete frauds. Because if they're talking about ultimate truth, and they can't see the biggest lie being that's been thrown out in human history for hundreds of years anyway, right? The last 5 years of garbage we've gone through. If they can't see that, then how can they possibly be revealing anything beyond that? This is obvious within the reality of the last 5 years. So uh, there's a whole lot of so-called spiritual teachers that got obviously presented as just false. And I know that's also left a lot of people with a lot of questions because there's someone they've trusted, they've read their books for 10 or 15 years, and then all of a sudden they're like, what? I need this, thing to go and be able to see you. I need a jab in my arm to go here. What do you mean? And they kind of say, well, what have I been doing for the last 15 years with this person in these books? So there's also been a lot of people that not just the experience externally over these 5 years have been shaking within. It's the realization that how many they'd followed for this time maybe weren't what they thought they were following. So yeah, it's been on many levels. The last 5 years has been challenging for a lot of people.
Another, yeah, problem that might arise, it depends on the person, I guess, but for some people, the idea of emptiness and then all of a sudden they end up in complete nihilism
Hmm.
without even noticing. And
Yep.
they might even come up with very stupid ideas like, yeah, okay, I am not real, the train is not real. Let's lay down on the rail track here. And when the train comes, nothing will happen because we are both not real. And that, of course, will be a horrible choice.
At least I can say from my own experience, that is almost a guaranteed part of the after emptiness experience.
Mhm.
It like you can't avoid it because it's so shocking that the revelation of it is so shocking that mind is unable to function for a while. And literally this awareness, which is not false. That's the difficult part. Like what you just said, when someone's saying that's not actually false. But like you say, if you don't temper that with, again, some type of mental logical structure, you will do a lot of dumb things. And that's pretty common that people will do dumb things for a while after such an experience of emptiness. That's why I call it integration. Integration is really important because the sooner you can have that integration experience, the sooner you can stop doing that. And yes, some people will get stuck in that. It's known as being it's being drunk on emptiness, I think is the Buddhist term for it. And you can be there for 20 or 30 years where yeah, you just, someone tells you, "Oh, this is happening, my sister's having this horrible thing," and "Oh, yeah, she doesn't exist. It doesn't matter, drink your tea." And so again, it's this two-sided thing where part of the work is having to immerse yourself in the matrix, in the difficulty of the place, of the suffering of people, and to build, as I call it, empathy for all other creatures that are here in order to recognize that we may be, and again, don't take my word for it. Everyone needs to go and find this information out for yourself, characters in video games, but that doesn't mean you have no empathy for the other. Actually, you should have more empathy for the other characters. You should have the empathy should flow off the table, and that happens from the combining of the emptiness with the understanding of the matrix realm itself. It creates this balance point. So when you talk about these, they call them traps after emptiness. They're usually because somebody's on fully on one side or the other, and they've forgotten that there's a balance point that gets walked within this reality, of how about those people? I'm sure you must have ran into them too, who, you say something like, "Oh, how are you doing?" "Oh, who do you mean by you?" Or and then, "Oh, well, I don't say I because if I say I, then it's like the person is just asking how you're doing. They just asked you a very nice question. Just respond to it like a regular person in the Matrix. And I think that gets so lost. It's like the realization is one thing, being able to take that back into a character and just do simple things like somebody needs a tire change, to go help them change the tire and not go into some sort of gigantic lecture about tires and meta and matrix and what it just, they need a tire change, just fix the tire for them. So it's this very, and it can take, like I said, it can take a while. Some get lucky and they can get through that fairly quickly, and some can get stuck in that for a long, long time. And it's difficult for them and it's difficult for anybody around them.
Mm. Yeah, that is very true. I definitely have met those people that you just described, and but you know, usually I didn't say anything. I just thought, what's your fucking problem?
Well, we know what the problem is exactly. We know we can see it, and that's what makes it also so difficult is when you can see it and they can't, because you can't bring it up, you can't say it
Mm.
because from their new perspective, it's unseen. It's like something will have to shake them up pretty difficultly in order to maybe get them to get out of that perspective. A really good example, just a simple one, but Adi Ashanti was writing in his books when he was talking about his long integration period. And he used to be a championship cyclist, right? When he was still Pete Gray, when he hates when you call him that, but when he was Peter Gray and he was a famous cyclist, and then he had this experience and he started, you know, going into these meditative phases and quiet and stillness. And but then he got the urge to start riding a bike again. And he'd start riding it and he'd start training. And then he'd get really sick. And then he'd go in, then he'd get stuck in bed and he'd realize, oh, it's because I'm not Pete Gray the cyclist anymore. I've got to be something else now. But then he'd start feeling better, and then he'd get on the bike, and instead of just going for a ride, he'd start training again. He'd start and there's no reason for it. He's not in any cycling contest, but just, and then he gets sick again. And he finally said, once he finally just, okay, once I'm done with that, that's not who I am, then all the illnesses and things stop. So it's weird that sometimes we would need something like that to give us a shake to finally see where we're stuck.
Yeah, usually that is yeah, let's say you yourself or somebody that you care about has all of a sudden a horrible disease or any other type of problem that might be an experience that brings them back to the
Good.
ground.
Yep. Yep.
So ultimately, it's about balance again.
Yep. Right. Um, someone might ask, well, what should I be doing now? Like, somebody said, well, okay, how do I start to, well, it's actually the foundation stuff is really important and it's very simple. Richard Rose described it as getting your house in order.
Mhm.
And I didn't fully understand it at the time when I'd actually even read it, but now it makes complete sense. And what he meant by that, eventually, house meaning your mind. Eventually your mind getting to a place that's still, that's calm, that can see things logically, that can is not being distorted. Um, if there's trauma in your past, that's been healed. If there's but at the same time, getting your house in order means making sure you have a place that you live every day, making sure that you have enough food coming in, making sure that you have actual friends and people that you can talk to, and that you have you don't have to build some kind of anything special. It's just that your character's needs on Earth are covered and that you've got ways of being active and grounded and in the world and in nature, and then you can start expanding outward. That if you don't have that base, if you're trying to escape that, which many on the spiritual path are trying to do, they don't want to have to look at their past traumas. They don't want to have to you know, have enough money to pay the rent. They don't want, there's all these things they don't, and it's like Rose is saying, but if you don't actually have that, you're going to have so much stress and so much inner anxiety that it's going to block. You're never really going to be able to do the work that you want to do because all these other things are going to be, in a sense, sucking your energy. So his point was get yourself one way or another to a place that's fairly balanced, fairly functional, fairly grounded. Then from that point, then you can start going deep and then you can start doing this other work because you don't have your basic things are covered, you might say. And then you are safe to start going into your past. You are safe to start going into what internally has to be transformed in order to eventually get that house that's in order, or as St. John of the Cross called it, he called it a house that's at rest. And that's it's foundational. It doesn't seem overly spiritual or seemingly overly important, but it really is. The more you get your house in order, the more you can use that to build whatever work, whatever area you want to examine or are working into, that's your physical rooted foundation to do that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we cannot all sit in a literal cave this time. Some people do that. They sit in a cave and meditate for a couple of years. Yeah, okay, that's a choice, but it's also not very useful for anybody around you.
Well, certainly not running around you, but again, each person's path is going to be so unique.
Mm.
And who knows, maybe that person who did that, that's exactly what they needed. That somehow, for some reason, the way their world had been structured, they needed that. But that should be done as a choice based on, like, a lot of times that's done because I can't function here. I don't like this place. I hate this world. So I'm going to go and, in a sense, I'm going to leave it and do the spiritual search. It has more power if someone can be at the point where they can completely function here. They have no problem. They could, if they wanted to, just go on and comfortably live and potentially even have a family and friends. And then they decide, no, actually, even though I've proved I can do that, then I'm going to go do this. Then something like that could have power if that's what's required. So again, this having your house in order allows you to take whatever next step might be required from a place of strength as opposed to a place of, you might say, just running away from reality, which never really works because reality always follows you.
You say in your book that this place has been created to be insane, that it was never meant to be anything else but that it yeah, creates suffering. It is insane. It doesn't make sense. And I think, well, okay, in my case, it was as a little child. It was more like a feeling. I was never able to communicate it to adults, but I had the strong impression everything is upside down here. It does not make sense.
Yeah. Mr. Park told us once that if you're looking for the truth, it's the opposite of everything you believe.
Mm.
It's a similar way of presenting it. That was, for me, that was the most important, we'll call it acceptance that I had to come to before I could start even writing Exit the Cave and Empty the Cave. Um, we all, it doesn't take long to start seeing something is wrong with this place, that something is it just, it's insane. And so the natural human tendency is because we have been built with these, whatever religious story we heard when we were a small child, that there's a God of love and they've built this place, they've built it for our joy and our learning and our whatever. So the problem must be something is wrong in the world then. It couldn't have been built like this, so I need to go and fix it. And that's a natural tendency. I think everybody, when you start to see that something is wrong with this place, you look to how can you fix it? And people might spend a decade trying to do that, and it never gets better, right? The world as a whole never actually improves. Tiny things might change, but like look at the insanity now, like where we are now. It's way worse than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. It just keeps getting worse. And when I finally realized that, oh, right, the Matrix was built as an energy sucking tool that requires not just suffering, but it requires distortion, it requires confusion, it requires, like you just said, inversion. That's a really good word to use. Things are upside down. It was built like that. It was built to be insane. And so if I'm trying to actually change it as in the entire reality, I'm doing exactly what the reality wants because it knows I have no chance of succeeding. It's gonna suck even more energy out of me. But once I realize, the only job is to then be personally sane. Reality can be as insane as it wants to be. It's doing its job, right? Our job personally is to be sane, or as I just want to get the quote right from, I think it's Goethe who made the quote. Um, where is it? Just so I can, it's in my little book here. Um, I know because I just read it like 2 minutes before we started, so I know it exists. I know it exists in this chapter. Yes. Oh, sorry, by Albert Camus. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And that statement stopped a ton of stress in my system because even a few years ago I still had this belief that if this just happened, if that just happened over there, these people just did that. And when I finally realized it's about personal sanity and it's about sharing that sanity or help with a few people close to you in a small environment, whether it's just a few close friends, maybe it's just a few people, a few places next to you where you live, that has tremendous transformative power. To use that energy in a small group, but as soon as that energy tries to go out to, I'm fixing the world, I'm saving everybody, that's just going to wear somebody out. And then 10 years later, they're going to wonder what happened to their life. And unfortunately, that's a pretty standard story. So that for me was an unbelievable saving grace. It's not a fun thing to have to come to a realization, but unfortunately, when you want, if you want absolute truth, um, you can't sugarcoat it and have things that you want it to be. It has to reveal itself the way that it is. And so now I know reality is never going to get better. I know this place will never improve. Based on the way it's structured and built, it can't. It can transform, it can look different, it can go through periods where it doesn't seem as bad, but it's all just then getting ready for the next, steamroller to come and take you down. But
Mhm.
once you see that and you disengage and you say, oh yeah, my focus is my own personal sanity and maybe being of value and um, we'll call it like assistance to some people around you, just to be literally just to be a friend, that then you see where the power really lies. And that can actually have tremendous transformative steps by by going small, you can become quite large.
That reminds me of some people here in Germany. I haven't met them personally, but they made videos about it. They started out as, working with the refugees, with the migrants that are coming in. I'm a good person. I want to support them and help them. And did a lot of them did it voluntarily on top of their day job, or it became their day job. And then after, let's say, 1 or 2 years, they made a complete U-turn and stepped away from it and said, actually, what we are doing is insane. You cannot. It's not possible. You go in there, you want to be a good human being, but at the end, you are the one that is frustrated
Yeah,
to the bones.
right. And that's where it becomes a bit of a challenge because um, the concept I'm talking about, exiting slash emptying the cave, is a very personal one.
Mm.
And that personal journey requires energy. It's because you have to come face to face with death and actually cross over, in a sense, come back with that which you're going to experience. And so you need energy. And when you realize that, then you realize, well, a lot of what I'm calling my energy on a day-to-day basis is getting drained out of me from all sorts of just even on a simplistic level, just by doing way more things in one day than I should. I mean, a spiritual path must be so difficult for parents with three or four children, and they have their own jobs to do, and then they got to take one kid to school, one kid to soccer practice, one kid to gymnastics, and it's like, when do they ever get time to just be still and have some time for their own inner thought process? It's very little. And so we have to recognize that on all of our levels, wherever we are, there's a ton of things trying to get our attention, which is to pull energy out of us. And our job is the opposite, which is to say, I'm going to be very miserly with my energy. It's not that I'm not going to put energy into things. I'm just going to choose very carefully what things I want to put my energy into. And it's okay to say no to this, no to this, no to this, no to this, but I'll say yes to this because, like anything, whatever your underlying intent is, you have to put the majority of your energy towards that, right? If you want to become a famous golfer, well, the majority of your time has to go into golfing. If you
Yeah.
put all that time into video games, you're not going to be a golfer. So if your choice is, I'm going to be someone who wants to know my true nature or exit the cave or understand death or know what God is or whatever, well, then at least 51% of your energy, more than has to go into that practice. And that means other things will have to be reduced. And that's, again, it seems simple, but it's really, really important. What you might call Carlos Castaneda's books, there's lots of things I like about them, there's lots of things I don't like about them. But one of the key messages was those exercises that were being given from whether it's recapitulation, not doing, dreaming, walking, the real underlying purpose was to change your behavior and your way of thinking so that you'll store more energy. And by storing more energy rather than wasting it, you will have that available for the deeper work when it's required. So yeah, that's a big part of it is this restructuring of what energy we have and where we use it.
Circling back to emptiness, I was just thinking, can we compare it to a, let's say, mathematical zero? Zero has no value in itself, but without it, you wouldn't have tens, twenties, hundreds, thousands, and so forth. So meaning it contains a lot of possibilities and is actually the foundation.
It's yes, it's both, and that's the challenge. It's no thing and it's everything at the same
Mm,
time.
mm,
The everything side, though, that's the fun part, right? That's the, in a sense, the unity side of emptiness. That's the nice part. That's the side everybody wants because that's the part that's enjoyable. The no thing side, especially to the egoic self, that seems really unfulfilling because it's nothing. And so because this side is fairly well talked about, I have to talk about the more on the side that nobody wants to hear. But yes, the true, again, just like we just been talking about, it's always is bringing these two parts together into one whole. So both nothing and everything are still, it's still that question of what's in the gap between the two, or what is that thing that is between even both nothing and everything. That's where the doorway actually is. I don't say emptiness is the doorway out of the matrix, but I say that it's the doormat that's at the door that you wipe your dirty feet on before you're potentially ready to go out. And it's just like I said, seeing the matrix and seeing emptiness. Well, even if you see emptiness, you have to see the no thing and you have to see the everything and understand how those combine into one very odd totality, which includes all of it and none of it. So That's why it's a long process of even if someone gets that experience, it can take a decade, 20 years to kind of piece together what just happened. And I guess one of the reasons, even though I know it's a difficult book to read, I finally chose to write this next one was because it happens to more people than I ever thought. I've run into more people that it's legitimately, honestly happened to. And if something I'm writing or presenting is a little bit helpful to that journey then afterwards, because not much, there's more talked about now than there used to be. Like when it happened to me 20 years ago, there was almost nothing on it. It was very confusing because I couldn't, it was hard to get any information at all. And that's really what it's there for, is just to offer some different ideas and offer some different ways to go about if this has actually happened to the me thing here, well, what do I do now? Because if you make seemingly, I made very bad choices at the beginning. I didn't take the time that was required to integrate it. I moved right back into the world very, very quickly. And I needed 6 months, 8 months of just kind of shutting it all down and figuring out what just happened. What does this mean? How does this thing function now? And that those things are very important to go through that period. And so if anything, that's why I'm writing and talking about it, because if it happens to you tomorrow, even though what I'm saying today might seem like this is of no value, I don't understand anything, this guy kind of just sounds crazy. But if the realization of emptiness happened tomorrow, then you might say, oh yeah, that guy's conversation. Now I get it. Now I get it. I get what he was kind of referring to. And then maybe that can help somebody in that particular stage, like kind of like I wish somebody was there to have helped me 20 years ago.
Yeah. You also mentioned in your book that the self, that which actually perceives, must be defined now. You cannot do it after death in the astral. So how do we do that?
Yeah, like I said, the journey of self-knowledge with a capital S starts with small s, self-knowledge. You have to get to know the thing that's in the mirror.
Hmm.
So that's where topics for some people, a life recapitulation might be very valuable to
What
go through
capitulation?
a life recapitulation where you
Ah, okay.
review your entire life from birth to death and know what's really happened in your existence. Getting to know your thoughts. That's a really important one that a lot of people don't really get into. Like, what do you actually think? Not even yet defining where does it come from? What's the origin of that thought? What should I do with it? Like, literally, even just what do I think? I did that. I carried a notebook and recorded thoughts for like 3 or 4 weeks and then made a giant chart out of them of like what were the ones I had, what thoughts did I have 150 times, what thoughts did I have 20 times, and I could be so you could begin to learn tracking your mind. Um, all of these kind of things are you have to get to really know this thing that's here. What does it feel? What does it like? What does it dislike? And more importantly, why? Where did those things originate from? So that's where the life recapitulation can come in. But at a certain point, yes, there becomes this sense of but I think there's more. I think what I'm classifying as the true me is more than this. And so how does one go about that work? Yeah, it's simple answer. It's observing the self to such a degree that eventually there becomes a shift where we're not the normal observer that we think we are, which we would normally classify as a mind. They normally think I am here and I'm seeing the world. And all of a sudden we become something else that is seeing this mind and seeing the thought and we realize, well, if I can see thought, then I can't be thought. If I can see feeling, then I can't be feeling. So what is this new thing? So as I said, it's kind of a journey where you're going backwards and deeper into another, we would call it layer, farther and farther back, which is constantly the the challenge of spiral. It's called spiraling inward by many people. And the challenge with going inward, going within, is that people have come to believe that the skin is the dividing line. That there's this outside me, and then there's this thing called inside me. And so inside me means thoughts and feelings, and that's self-definition of the self. But when we begin to see that, wait a minute, even thoughts, even feelings, even all of this, they're also outside of a much larger self. So actually spiraling within means eventually to get into that unbelievably deep self, or if we change it into Gnostic terms, dropping into your divine spark. Eventually, eventually dropping into the thing which is absolutely true of what you are, or symbolically to awaken sleeping beauty. That's what the um, that's what that fairy tale is talking about. Sleeping Beauty is this divine spark. Sleeping Beauty is in a coma, right? Howdy Mickoski never has to awaken. Howdy Mickoski is a character in a dream, but that which is, you might say, operating Howdy Mickoski, the sleep, which is Sleeping Beauty, she's in a coma. She's asleep. It's Sleeping Beauty that needs to be roused from her sleep. And one of the ways we do that is we become the prince that Sleeping Beauty wants to awaken for. Right? Sleeping Beauty doesn't want to awaken for any jackass prince that comes down the. She wants to awaken for someone with integrity, with courage, with honesty, who will go through hard work, who that she can trust in the journey. That's we're building a character that Sleeping Beauty will wake up for. So that's where this material, non-material connection starts to happen. We're not trying to perfect ourselves because we need to be perfect. We're perfecting ourselves in a sense, or transforming ourselves in such a way so that which we really are will get itself out of the coma and say, I want to work with that person.
Yeah. So a good start would be observing your thoughts, but not identifying with them.
Well, yeah, step one is just finding out what you think.
Mm.
Like non-judgmentally, yeah. Like what the way I did it was I had a watch at the time that you could set to beep at a certain time, and I set it for like every like 4 minutes or something, so that you would be unable to, you couldn't just by looking at a clock, you wouldn't be able to guess. Like it's not every 15 minutes or something, so you know it's coming and you can kind of change your thought. It was something like that. And then whenever it would go off, whatever the thought was, it didn't matter. I wrote it down. No judgment, no nothing. It's just that's what was in my mind. And 4 minutes, oh, that was in my mind. And like I say, over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, you'll start to notice thoughts are interestingly coming way more often of certain ones that you thought. And so what you're doing is you're starting to build a thought package, right, of what you think. Then after you've got the thought package, then you can start being a little judgmental if you want. Say, okay, like this thought that I had like 500 times. Well, why? Why am I having it? Does it help
Yeah.
me? And the answer is no, I don't think this thought helps me at all. Well, where is it coming from? And is it even my thought? And that's a whole nother series of questions to begin asking, like, you know, do we really own our thoughts, or are thoughts projections from some other source? That's another a little exercise people can try. This one's fun. This one wasn't came from me. This one came from a woman named Amara Strand, who I interviewed a while back. And she talked about how she found that a number of her thoughts were literally like broadcasted by the system. She called it like the matrix itself sends out a almost like there's continual ideas and thoughts that it broadcasts, and that we have the equivalent of like a radio antenna at the top of our head that picks these things up. And the higher the antenna is and the more we're not paying attention to it, the more what you might call the hive mind thoughts of this reality just become our own thoughts. And she said what you could do is symbolically see that antenna and drop it into your head, like literally see it like drop into your head and have that area closed off so the antenna is picking up nothing. Okay, I tried that myself just out of curiosity. I said, okay, sounds odd. Almost all my thoughts were gone. Like I was just sitting there, like, you know what? I can't think. I'm beginning to realize she might be onto something. So it's a symbolic metaphor, but something like that where you practice shutting off whatever's external to you that's being projected into your mind, and then see what's left. Because whatever's left after that point, then those are true thoughts. Like those are thoughts, then you could say those come then from me, and then for 100%, I should trust those. And then we could learn to say, all these other thoughts that I've listed, they're coming from an outside source. So I shouldn't trust those. And that also can help simplify what's going on in there. We don't need to force them out. We just need to categorize them as mine or not mine.
Hmm. I I can see that it makes sense to me, and I have a strong feeling that this is how ideology solidifies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And that can be a disaster. When I look here at my own country, everybody knows why economically it's going down the hill. But funny enough, because of ideology, the government is not willing to, you know, change their energy policies or anything. And it all has to do with ideology.
Right.
This ideology seems to have eaten up their brain.
Yeah. It's a good metaphor or a way of, like, again, this idea that if somebody is not paying attention to that thoughts can be being projected from an outside source, and that, yes, certain, we'll call them controlling beings within this realm, have a way of, you might say, hacking into that and putting their own thought package into the projected thought package. That's the easiest way to get a population to do what it wants. You don't have to necessarily, you just create a package that the thoughts come into people's mind and they think they're their own, and all of a sudden you have everybody just following along and doing what you want to do. And so again, she talked about, by doing this little experiment, you would see, and I guess it did work for me. And so it makes complete sense, like what you just said, anywhere in the world, why there is so easy conformity in certain areas, because if the message is strong enough, most people will not be able to overcome it. And they won't see it as it's coming from out there. I'm agreeing with it. They literally think it's their own thought, it's their own realization of all sorts of things and whatever, and it's not. It's just a projection into their head. Um,
Yeah, exactly. And then you have it amplified by the media, and
yeah,
then the
it's
circle
part of.
is complete, and everybody believes in the biggest nonsense.
Oh, thoughts are bizarre. There's a guy I know who had studied with us in Hawaii with Mr. Park. And he had told us about when he was at a certain Zen monastery a few years before that, he had spent 4 months not speaking. So he did not speak for 4 months, and he carried, a notepad if he had to pass a message on to somebody, but no conversation. By the end of the 4 months, he said he could hear other people's thoughts, like perfectly. He would be able, and so and one day he went into Walmart for something. And when he went into Walmart, he could hear all 1,000 people's thoughts, and he said they were all insane. None of the thoughts in anybody's mind had any logical use. They were all just nuts, and they were all coming at him at one time. And he said he just went like literally screaming out of the Walmart. And his I guess the Zen teacher at the time had to kind of do some work with him to kind of calm him down and ended his practice at that point. But he realized that, oh yeah, the average person's thoughts are nuts. So there's no surprise why the world is the way it is when he actually heard what everybody's thinking. The flip side of that, though, because it is a skill, it's not, and we shouldn't necessarily say it's a bad skill, but if someone really wants to help somebody, like if you truly, truly want to help somebody, you're going to have a difficult time doing it if you can't merge with their thoughts and know exactly what they think, know exactly what their life story was, know exactly why they're doing what they're doing. Because usually they'll tell you one thing, but the true thing behind them, they're keeping that walled off and hidden. So if you ever learn how to be in total rapport with another person, with their permission, of course, to know what, then you would be able, if you have the skills to help them, you would then know exactly what they need and what they require. And that's kind of what psychology is supposed to do. But psychology is trying to help somebody without really knowing what's going on in their mind, but trying to guess what's in the mind, as opposed to, like a shaman 1,000 years ago. Well, that shaman would have entered the person's mind, would have seen everything that's going on, would have known their life, would have known, okay, and here's exactly what they need. And it's another reason why their cures would have almost 100% success rate, because they knew exactly what was required for that particular person to overcome the challenge they were in.
Did this individual learn to switch it off, to hear everybody's thoughts at will? Yeah.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah. That's what I say about the teacher he was with then did some things with him too. And he said he just had to start talking again. It took
Hmm.
him about 3 or 4 days, and it was almost completely gone at that point. Um, I know I had the opposite experience of what we just talked about. And that happened after I had my canning experience and my realization of emptiness. Was I could go into rapport with someone very, very easily if they were having a challenge, like I was just saying. And I would I would experience their trauma, not like seeing the trauma external. I would be experiencing it as them. And it was, on one hand, it was overwhelming, because some of it was so dark. It was so intense of what people, that's how I started realizing what people had actually gone through in this reality. But more so, when I stepped out of it, I had a very difficult ability, or a very difficult chore, to now separate myself from the person, because I had literally just experienced it as them in that moment. So now when I'm outside and I'm back with the person here, I couldn't tell the difference between me and them. And so there became this overwhelming, almost, um, again, like you were talking about earlier, this not really making good choices. You could easily make a bad choice, because if someone said, if the other person said, I need this, well, naturally, I'm you. So how could I just went through the same thing you did? How could I say no to your request? Because there was no separation. And so, as much as there's power in that, what we're talking about, there's also a lot of potential confusion, and a lot of places where you need to also learn how to handle that in order to step in and step out, and not get overly, be able to stay grounded with it. So I should mention that to anyone as we're talking, because it's a valuable tool, but it can be difficult to deal with. And of course, certainly there's some people who have that tool, and they go looking into people's minds without their permission, and that's a pretty unwise thing to be doing. And that can lead to a lot of problems too, if you do have that skill and you're not getting 100% permission from the person. Yes, I would like your help. Yes, I'd like you to do this for me. That can also cause, like everything, there's so many things in this reality that, even though you think you're trying to do something helpful, can actually make things worse.
Yeah. And you know, entering into somebody's mind without permission, I see it as a violation.
Yeah,
Yeah. So there is, even you might mean well,
exactly.
but no, that is not how it should be. Definitely not.
No, like I'm saying, there's a lot of that becomes a challenge with a lot of power. Like there are powers that you can get on a spiritual path. No, we're
Hmm.
not making that up. There really are. Um, but if you're not able to handle what it means to have it, you can cause, even with good intentions, you can cause a mess behind you. And so it's just a reminder of, again, it's this knowing the self, working on yourself, transforming yourself in such a place that you can handle things. I don't want to use it in a good way. That's a terrible word because we're just talking about duality. You can you can you can handle if something comes in a way with a lot of empathy. And somebody with empathy wouldn't, for example, just go into someone's mind and, cause a potential disturbance or whatnot. The empathy in them would stop that. So, because I don't like the term compassion. There's a reason I don't use it because sort of built into the word compassion is that there's something wrong with the other person or the other thing you're having compassion for, that you kind of, there's an elevation of I'm here and they're down there and I'm showering them with compassion, as opposed to empathy where you're equal. You're both equally coming from a similar place. And so you're always meeting that other thing at a similar place. And that's just why I choose that word over compassion.
Yeah. And the lack of empathy is one of the hallmarks for narcissists, and we have a
Mm.
lot of them running around, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um,
And, and
Exploitation.
and there's a question like nobody asked, well, why? Why are there so many? Where are they? How and why are they being generated and generated at such a high level? Um, because it's not just something evil that gets thrown into someone's mind, right? It's like it's a natural reaction by that egoic structure to say this is a good response. This has value when it starts being used. It just never stops being used. And so the question people as a giant society, we should be asking, well, why is this happening on such a grand scale? that seems to be that seems to be missed, that because there's a whole lot of information that would be understood if somebody starts asking, well, why now? Hmm.
Yeah, that is an interesting question that I have asked myself a lot of times. Why do
Right.
we produce so many of them? And I mean, the entire narcissist subject can become very confusing, especially when the what do they call it? DM, the psychiatrist, DMS5, or there's some, it doesn't matter. And then they have this long, long list. Yeah, and I think for narcissists is more than 50. And of course, not every narcissist checks every box. And so for myself, I um, I made it very simple. The three E's: lack of empathy, entitlement, and exploitation. If I see that as a behavioral structure, there is a good chance you're dealing with a narcissist. And on top of that, if you find yourself all of a sudden researching narcissism, that might be another good indicator that you had an experience like
Yeah,
that.
and I would say that would be the tool. Like if I was ever going to recommend a tool, because I've seen these things on the internet. Oh, once if someone's a narcissist, they can never transform, they can never be better. And it's like, well, everything theoretically can transform. And I would say the thing that I would, if it were me, my recommendation would be the one to work on is empathy.
Yeah.
That if all of a sudden empathy can truly be acquired, not fake empathy, not compassion, not just being nice. I mean, there becomes a true empathy, and it probably would have to start with either with nature, with plants, with animals, with, trees, with something. Somehow there becomes a true, for one way or another, an empathetic connection between the person and something natural. Then I would think there's possibility for change at that point. Um,
Yeah, that is also a something when recovering alcoholics.
hmm,
And they usually get the advice, don't go into a relationship with anybody for at least 12 months. And then before you do, what you should do first is try to see if you can keep a plant alive. If you succeeded there, try to see if possible, if conditions allow, if you can keep a pet alive.
Right.
And if you succeed in both areas, then you can go out and establish a relationship with another person.
I think actually that should be the rule for everybody.
Yeah.
Like literally from the time you're 14, 12 or 14 years old, don't, before you get in a relationship, yeah, start with a plant. Prove that you can do that. Prove that you can care for that. And yeah, work your way up. But yeah, I would say that empathetic structures, it was a core of Schopenhauer, right? Schopenhauer, that was the core, because Schopenhauer is one of these people who he said the world is suffering. He was one of the first philosophers to have, you might say, him and I, one sense, we would have probably a simple conversation together. He had a completely different train where this goes. I write about Schopenhauer actually in Empty the Cave. I have a whole appendix section on him in there. Um, but yeah, that was his core. His core was to empathize with other, and he had a thing where he didn't say hi to people as in hello, hello Jim. He used to say hello fellow sufferer. And that was, yeah, that was his way of reminding himself and others of the reality, and that therefore he's reaching out, already recognizing that, hey, you are probably suffering or have suffered too. And I'm instantaneously, from the second I'm meeting you, acknowledging that our core as experiencers, as much as we don't want to admit it, has been one way or another built on pain and suffering. And so let's start with that core connection and go from there.
So to wrap this up, you
Mhm.
also talk about baptism, baptism of fire and baptism with
Mm,
water.
yeah.
And you say that baptism with water is immersion into the matrix. Why is that?
Well, there, if you have to go back to Cathar teachings, the group in southern France that was exterminated by the uh, Roman Church in the 12, 1300s. And they were very clear that and other groups, they're not, Cathars were not the only of these groups in southern France. There were like, and I'm actually researching a new book as to why that might be, why southern France is the hotbed of these sort of similar yet slightly altered Gnostic philosophy. But they said that water baptism, i.e., coming from John the Baptist, is a process of the devil, and only a baptism of fire, which would link to the Pentecost, would be the baptism of Christ, therefore, the true baptism. And if we look in oh, hi, Kitty. Yeah. If you look at recent movies, whenever the Matrix or reality is being presented, it's usually presented in water-like terms. The Matrix is the movie itself is presented as water. You have the story of Narcissus. Here we're talking about narcissism. Well, Narcissus, of course, is projecting his image onto water. So water is a projection source. It's also a source of everything. You might call it like almost like source code. So, to the Cathars, a water baptism would mean immersing yourself deeper into the matrix, while a baptism of fire of the Christ is going to burn away the false. So take this metaphor as something really interesting. The story of Jesus walking on water. Normally, people take that story as being an example of how he is superior or perfected or above and can control the material realm. But what if that story is really representing he's walking on water, means he can walk on the matrix, meaning there's nothing in the matrix that can trick him, that can cause him to sink into it, that the Christ is fully as flame. Now, I'm linking this flame idea to, again, the divine spark. Divine spark, as I understand it, there's, while there are now hundreds of thousands of divine sparks, maybe millions in our reality, I've come to see it as that there was only one divine fire that entered this matrix. There was one fire that came from outside inside. That was the power source or the thing that gave the demiurge the ability to create things that were living, things that were moving. But what the demiurge did to make it more challenging was then the demiurge split that one fire into a million small fires, divine sparks. And part of what the baptism of Christ or a baptism of fire represents is the bringing back of that individual divine spark, which I think is individually me, and bringing that divine spark, connecting back to its original divine fire. And when all of the divine sparks are back at the divine fire, so it's also this idea of exiting the matrix. Like you don't just kind of, I just don't think you don't kind of exit the matrix and then individually almost you get yourself to the doorway with the divine fire, and then you just kind of, then you wait till all the rest of the sparks are there. So that's why I shared the metaphor of what the Cathars had to say about water and fire, because I do think that links to the origin when you read stories about the starting of the matrix itself. In religious terms, it's water-based. When you talk about life being, or it being the lifeless creation being able to have motion, that's fire. So for me, that metaphor is a valuable tool in going through whatever ancient text someone wants to go through and recognizing that even in ancient Egypt, water and fire was understood in this kind of way. And then there's the Mayan concept of burning water, which is, again, it's interesting. Burning water would mean steam. So the fire is, in a sense, causing the water to become steam, or causing the matrix to, in a sense, become transparent, become no longer solid, so that it could be seen through into its truth, but the fire stays strong because the fire would only go out if it doesn't, if the fire keeps it at water, the fire would go out. So the fire uses in such a way that turns it to steam so that the fire stays and the water is evaporated. Just a
Yeah,
metaphor.
it has to be a strong fire, otherwise
Yeah,
water, because it's
right.
they both are. Fire can evaporate a lake.
Well, if you could put the lake in a giant pot and put it on the fire, then you give
Hmm.
it time, it will.
Yeah,
So it's also, I think, the setup of how the fire would interact with the water, right? If the fire jumps into the lake, the fire will go out.
yeah.
And fire probably tried that many times. But if fire realizes, if I stay here and put the water into a container on top of me, then I'm patient. Eventually, there'll be no more water. So I think it also requires fire to maybe have had to learn a bit, had to go through some um, errors and things that didn't work, and maybe fire finally is understanding how to interact with the matrix. Again, water matrix, fire that which is outside the matrix, how to handle that interaction in such a way that, again, fire can return nostalgically back home.
Mhm. Yeah. So, yeah, I thank you so much for coming on, and it was a great pleasure as usual. I always have great conversations with you. Is there anything that you really need to add?
No, I'm glad to see that you're still doing this, Judith. I mean, you do good interviews. I mean, it's one of the reasons I would still come to have these conversations, even though, um, it might seem like he doesn't have a very positive attitude. Actually, I think it's the opposite. It's by being honest with what is negative, and if you burn through that, then you will see what is truly deep and positive and powerful behind it. Um, and so I'm glad you're still doing this, and I'm glad you're still having conversations with people and you're still continuing. And I know that this subject is very big in Germany. The German population, with what you might call exploring the matrix, well, a lot of the world is we'll call it very new age spiritual. Actually, Germany is a place for various reasons that is very interested in studying the matrix as a concept, studying reality. So it's also great that you're doing this, particularly that because that the German audience is one of the places in the world that is very focused on this subject.
Okay. So yeah, guys, that was it. Night flight for today with Howdy Mickoski, and we see you on the next one.